Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
Hi, we're Big Little Feelings.
You know what else is big and little? Batteries.
Big energy.
Little size, and they go in everything.
So we switched to the world's first 3-in-1 Child Shield by Energizer.
It's the only coin lithium battery that has 3 safety features designed to help protect kids.
Secure packaging,
a bitter coating to help discourage swallowing, and an exclusive color alert technology that turns mouths blue when it comes into contact with saliva.
To learn more, visit Energizer.com.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X at Red Treehouse Pod. And if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. A long time ago, when I was a senior in high school, I loved going on different ghost hunting adventures. Living in New Jersey at the time, there were plenty of abandoned, scary, and haunted buildings, roads, and bridges to explore. And I, along with a small group of friends and my dad, spent lots of weekends being amateur ghost hunters. Shout out to my dad for hanging out with us and adding to the fun. These ghost hunting adventures were as low budget as it gets. We had no equipment, and most times we found our locations by doing a simple internet search. We had no idea what to expect as we parked the car in a cul-de-sac and walked over a mile each way to an abandoned slaughterhouse in the middle of the woods. Along the dirt path were several empty houses, which we quickly discovered had strange symbols throughout the interior. And while we all saw and heard strange things from time to time, we had the most fun scaring ourselves silly with wild stories about the supposed haunting. Despite my love for all sorts of scary things, being a professional paranormal investigator wasn't in the cards. But recently, I received an email from an actual paranormal investigator who shared an experience he had at one of Virginia's most haunted locations, the Ferry Plantation House, which is believed to be haunted by 11 spirits. Today's episode comes from WTCW Paranormal. Quote, a ghost hunting group dedicated to catching real evidence of the paranormal on camera. End quote. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to hear a first-hand account of a paranormal investigator who spent an overnight at the Ferry Plantation House. Was his terrifying experience proof of the supernatural? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. It was July 2022, almost a year and a half ago now. But my memory of what I experienced in that godforsaken house remains unchanged. I had created the WTCW Paranormal team 9 months prior, and my birthday was coming up. Feeling it was time for my team to take on a more difficult investigation for a change, I decided that for my birthday present, I would rent out a local, notoriously haunted, plantation house for an overnight investigation. After a couple of weeks of negotiating with the homeowner, we settled on a time and date for myself and 3 other investigators, Tate, Chris, and Will B., to spend a night at the home. Fast forward to the night of the investigation, July 14th, 2022. At 8 p.m., me and the team met up outside the building with the homeowner, where he began by giving a full-length breakdown of the long history of the location. In summary, the history of the Ferry Plantation House can be traced as far back as 1642, when a ferry boat ran through the Lynnhaven River, giving the plantation its name. In 1692, the old donation church was built on the plantation. And in 1706, the church was used as a courthouse to host witchcraft trials, the only time that had ever happened in the state of Virginia. 30 years later, in 1736, the wooden courthouse was torn down and rebuilt in brick. This is the oldest section of the Ferry Plantation House, and has served as the backbone for future renovations to the home. In 1751, the Walke family bought out the plot of land and expanded upon the brick courthouse, turning it into a manor of their own. And in 1850, the third and final section was built out of timber by an unknown individual. Over 250 years later, in the 2000s, it was discovered the Ferry Plantation House sits on a Native American burial ground. The Ferry Plantation House is tucked into the back of a neighborhood. And one day, a team was hired to build a concrete tennis court near the house. While digging up the dirt to replace it with concrete, the excavation team dug up human skeletons. Now it's time for me to share my own experience. I'll admit, the Ferry Plantation House played host to one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The team consisted of myself, my father, Cody, who is the owner of the Ferry Plantation House, Tate, Chris, and Will B. We all met outside the house at 8 p.m. and began settling in and exploring our new environment. The architecture of the home was old, with low ceilings and tight walkways. The floor creaked with every step. And all of this created a claustrophobic feeling. When you first walk through the front door, you enter a strange room. There's a brick fireplace in the front of the room, with a doorway to the left and right of it, and a random assortment of historical items, including fur pelts, whips, foggy jars, and more. Walking through either one of these doorways will lead you to a strange crossway, a little wooden room with a staircase to the left, and 2 doors leading into the dining room directly in front of you. The dining room was much more open in comparison to the first room, with tall windows and another brick fireplace in the back of the room, as well as a well-adorned dining table. Walking through another doorway in the dining room will lead you to a small library connected to a living room, or as the owner referred to it, the death room. The death room is considered a hotspot, and it was easily the most spacious room in the house. And, just like the previous rooms, it was obvious the architecture was dated. Almost every piece of furniture in the room was antique and likely hundreds of years old. What stood out to me was the feeling I had when I was in the death room. A heavy feeling. You know that feeling in your chest when you see something really sad? It was like that. So far, I've only described the 3 rooms on the first floor. However, when you head up to the second floor, you'll walk into what used to be the slave quarters, which, like the death room, also held a very heavy energy. The room itself was fairly empty, with the only real furniture being an old-fashioned shoemaking station, sewing station, and cotton gin. It was surreal seeing the history of it all, and this was easily the oldest building I'd ever been in. There was a bedroom next to the slave quarters, and we were told it housed many people over the years. So many people, in fact, I can't recall who they were. There wasn't much to note in this room. It was just an old bedroom. After this, we approached the staircase to the 3rd and final floor, the attic, which was easily the most off-putting floor. The stairwell leading up to the attic was dim, and was only lit up by a flickering, hanging light bulb at the top. The whole stairwell was very tight and claustrophobic, with the walls, ceiling, and stairs painted white. At the top of the stairs were doors to the left and right. On the left was the nursery, and on the right was the nanny room. These 2 rooms were easily the creepiest, with dingy lighting from old lamps and very low ceilings. Being 6 foot tall, I couldn't stand up straight without my head grazing the ceiling. After touring the home, our team decided to set up home base in the nursery, with each of us doing a full individual sweep of the house while filming. I was up first, which meant I had to go through the entire house alone, while Tate, Chris, and Will B stayed in the nursery. All I had with me was a laser temperature reader and a flashlight. Starting in the entry room, I breezed through every room without catching anything abnormal. I'll admit, considering I paid hundreds to spend the night there, I almost believed this whole thing was a scam. That is, until I went upstairs to the slaves' quarters. While in the room, I took a temperature scan, and I was shocked to discover the exact temperature of the room was 66.6 degrees, which was low when compared to the 72 degrees in all the other rooms. I chuckled to myself, saying, 66.6 degrees, huh. My chuckling quickly stopped when I witnessed something I'd never seen before in my life. My flashlight, which was the only source of light in the room, began flickering in and out. I immediately panicked, and I couldn't stop thinking, what are the odds of something like that happening in this exact scenario? Not knowing how to react, I immediately rushed out of the room and began searching for my teammates and for safety. I didn't know it yet, but this event was a warning for what was to come. Immediately following this experience, the investigation continued as planned, with each team member sweeping through the house individually. Tate went through and didn't see anything. Chris went through and didn't see anything. Will B went through and didn't see anything. I was the only one who experienced anything at all, and had I not caught it on camera, they might have thought I was lying. At around midnight, all 4 of us went down to the death room to conduct a spirit box session. Once there, we called out to anyone who was in the home and began asking questions. For the first few minutes, we didn't get anything, and we started losing hope. But then, we made a connection with someone or something. I asked, Who's here? What are you doing? At first, nothing. Then, as clear as day, we received a response. Looking. I was relatively new to investigating, and having made this connection, I really didn't know what to say next. I followed up by asking, whoever I'm talking to right now, where are you from? At first, nothing. Then, like before, I received a clear response. Hell. My team and I were in shock, as we really weren't expecting to receive a response like this. After collecting myself, I asked another question, this time with a shaky voice. Where are you right now? At first, nothing. Then, I received a clear response. Hidden. At this moment, I wanted to cut off the connection and end the conversation with whatever this entity was. I was afraid, and we were in over our heads. Still in the death room, the four of us decided to try and wind down after that scary interaction. We wanted to get our composure and figure out what we wanted to do from there. At about 1 a.m., Will B., who at that time didn't even believe in ghosts, said that he was feeling tired and wanted to take a nap. Seeing no issue with this, Tate, Chris, and I allowed him to rest. Wanting to give Will B some quiet, we moved into the dining room to sit down and relax for a bit before continuing our investigation. All was quiet. Then, it wasn't. After an hour or so, Will B rushed into the dining room and told us that something had woken him up. Frantically, he told us, quote, "Something picked up my leg and woke me up. I swear." End quote. I really didn't expect to hear this from Will, since he was a skeptic and only tagged along for the experience. Deciding to strike while the iron was hot, I went into the death room to investigate, alone. The rest of the team waited outside. That oppressive feeling had only intensified since our spirit box session, and my chest was damn near cramping from the pressure. After only a few seconds in the room alone, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the floor above and moving towards me. This was my worst nightmare. I was totally alone in a room with an entity that claimed it was from hell. I would have been a fool to wait around to see what happened. Instead, I immediately left the room and called the rest of the team back into the house. The team and I regrouped in the second-story bedroom. And for the first time since the inception of WTCW Paranormal, we started truly questioning if ghosts and demons were real. By this point, it was now 2:30 a.m., and Chris began complaining of a severe migraine. He described it as the worst migraine he had ever had. I tried my best to convince him to stay, but the pain was unbearable, and he simply didn't want to be there anymore. At that moment, Tate also came forward saying he was feeling very ill. Under normal circumstances, I would chalk this up to coincidence. However, given everything we'd experienced, I had that feeling that whatever was in this house was affecting them severely. At about 3 a.m., Tate, Chris, my father, and Cody went home, leaving me and Will B as the last remaining team members in the home. I didn't know what to do at this point. I was afraid after seeing what happened to Tate and Chris, and honestly, I didn't even know if I wanted to continue with the investigation. Then, When I needed him the most, Will B approached and said, quote, "Hey, I'm feeling really tired. I think I'm going to go to sleep for the night." End quote. With pain in my voice, I responded, quote, "All right, man, if that's what you want to do." End quote. By that point, the entity in the house had left me completely isolated. It drove away everyone, and I was the only one left. I thought that I might as well take my final stand against whatever this was. It's not like I had much of a choice anyway. I headed back to the slaves' quarters, alone, to face this thing head on and ask what it wanted with me. I sat on the floor and asked aloud, "Is anybody here?" To which almost immediately you could hear the steps leading up to the quarters creaking loudly, as if something or someone was approaching the room. I looked down in complete disbelief as to what I had experienced in the span of a few hours, when suddenly a huge bang came from the wall to the right of the room. Something was in the room with me, and I could sense that it was upset. This thing that made my flashlight flicker, that claimed it was from hell, that grabbed my friend's leg, that walked towards me while I was alone in the house, and that drove my whole team away, was now banging on the walls of the room I was in, and I was fucking terrified. Naturally, I folded and left the room after only a few minutes. It was around 4 a.m. at that point, and because of all the adrenaline that I had coursing through me, I was feeling exhausted. I went down to sleep, and by 9 a.m. on July 15th, 2022, I woke up having successfully investigated the Ferry Plantation House. A special thank you to the guys at WTCW Paranormal for sharing this first-hand perspective of the scary phenomenon at the Ferry Plantation House in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I don't know if you caught it earlier, but they captured their investigation on video. Simply go to YouTube and search for WTCW Paranormal to find the video. I'll admit, none of my ghost hunting adventures looked, sounded, or felt like this. And I'm not sure what we would have done if we'd heard heavy footsteps walking towards us, or loud banging coming from an unidentifiable source, or if a spirit claimed to be from hell. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'll admit something else. I'm a firm believer in ghosts and spirits. And as I've gotten older, and even though I live in one, I'd much rather tell stories about haunted houses than be in one. After all this, we're left with a lingering question. Is the Ferry Plantation House haunted? And is his account proof of the supernatural? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.